Good evening, everyone. We are Friends of the Earth International. I'm the chairperson, Hemanta Vitanage, comes from Sri Lanka. I have with me in my left side, Nele Marian. She's the Forest and Biodiversity Coordinator of the Friends of the Earth International. We have Nele Marian from Friends of the Earth Nigeria. Marian Bisi. And we have Deva Amirthalingam from Sabadala, Malaysia, Friends of the Earth, Malaysia. I hope now, so we have almost come to the end of the 2 weeks negotiations on the global biodiversity framework and other related matters. Everybody is wrapping up and ready to go home. It's time for us to understand the global biodiversity framework approved as a package last night or this early morning, whether what is the opinion comes from the civil society organization. It was approved in the last minute, and when people are so tired, I think we have some criticism about how it has done, and so we will come up with our comments on the process itself. But it was a 4-year process. It was supposed to be approved before, but it had enough time to come up with some agreements. But we have some concerns about the contents of the current biodiversity framework approved last night. It has some good elements, it has some bad elements, and at least we are happy that some of the concerns we had at the very beginning about the human rights approach and the rights of indigenous people and local communities are now inside this biodiversity framework. But at the same time, we see that there are a lot of concern about the financial package and some of the approaches, especially digital sequencing mechanisms and the sustainable identification. And there is some content about the agroecology. Let's hear from our colleagues here. And I want to invite Deva Amirthalingam from Sahabatala, Malaysia, to share her concerns about the approval of the last night Global Biodiversity Framework.
Thank you very much, Hemanta. My name is Deva Lingam, and I'm from Sabah Alam, Malaysia, Friends of the Earth, Malaysia. So yesterday we saw the adoption of the Global Biodiversity Framework, and one part of it that we saw was in relation to the adoption in relation to the financial mechanism. And I think that was a deal breaker in relation to whether this GBF would have been adopted or not. As I think we have seen from the start of this, at least the negotiations, that the more than 70 countries have been requesting for a separate and dedicated biodiversity fund. And that was, at least at this meeting, we saw it being raised over and over again by all these countries, where at the end, yesterday we saw in the text, we had the compromise text where we would have a trust fund that would be under the GEF, and as well as the advisory committee will also explore a separate biodiversity fund in the coming years. And in relation to the trust fund under the GEF, they have now inserted a sunset clause where it will be there until 2030, or if the COP decides otherwise. So this particular compromise is within the text itself, and we hope that after this there would be some serious discussion, because in principle we do agree that there needs to be a separate and dedicated biodiversity fund, and that this fund should not be under the GEF mechanism. And I think we've also seen the different problems faced by GEF, and we have heard all of this in the last few days. But from now, we need to see that this dedicated fund will have to be discussed further. and the modalities as well as the details of how this fund will be, in terms of how this fund will be set up, will have to be discussed very carefully under the advisory committee. But I would also want to raise in relation to the whole procedure yesterday, how this entire GBF was adopted. As Friends of the Earth International, we are very, very concerned that the process in which it was adopted was indeed, we feel that it was very shameful. As the Democratic Republic of Congo, if you have been following the process or following the negotiation process, they have made it very, very clear that they have always asked for this particular dedicated fund, and if there was no fund for this, they will not adopt the GBF. And despite that, this was raised yesterday. We are not saying that the GBF should not have been adopted, but the process itself in which it was done. And DRC was brave enough to oppose the adoption of the GBF, and at the very least, with the presence of the Secretariat as well as the legal advisor, they should have handled this process in a more amicable fashion. And this was not done. And in fact, what happened was they immediately went and adopted it without listening to whether there were any other opposition or whether there were any other statements. So all of this could have been done and handled in a more amicable manner. And this is something that we are very, very disappointed with. And we hope that this does not set the precedent for what would happen in future. So with that, we would like to record our extreme concern about this, and that it would be something that would be taken up by the Secretariat, and it would be discussed by the rest of the COP members who have been here as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Diva. You remember during those discussions, there were a lot of scientific terms came. And at the same time, as the civil society, we are asking to include the language on agroecology. Let's listen to Marianne Basi from Friends of the Earth Nigeria about her concern about whether this has been included, or whether civil society and the Friends of the Earth International are okay with this language, or why our problems with some of those texts.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Miriam Basi, J from Friends of the Earth Nigeria. We are concerned that proper oversight of biotechnology development is becoming harder and harder because of the rising influence of biotech/agribusinesses lobbies, and specifically Gates money. While the CBD had agreed on need for a regular and broad mechanism for horizon scanning, assessment, and monitoring, those interests successfully cut down to only agreements on a one-time initial round, narrowed what was supposed to be broad, and gutted the reference to biotech in the GBF to the point of meaninglessness, even cutting out references to precaution. The underlying problem is private money buying influence over this convention, just as it has been done in other conventions like the UNFCCC. We are also very worried of the term sustainable intensification coming before agroecology, because that term actually protects and profits the corporations and businesses. Agroecology, as it's meant by our small-scale farmers, in which we are animating their voices here, is agroecology. It's farming in harmony with nature, not against it. The agriculture promoted here, it's not what we are actually preaching, because we see this term is already being co-opted. The word agroecology as agriculture, it means agriculture. Our culture is part of our agriculture, and when it is taken out of this, it is something else. So we are not happy with with the decision that has come out from this convention. And as my colleague has said, with the also treatment melted on the delegates from the DRC, they were bullied into silence, and we want that to be registered. It's not fair that this is a convention on biological diversity where diverse voices should be heard and people should be listened to, and that we are coming here as representatives of our people back at home, and we come here and behave as if we are here on our own. We should always remember that we have just one planet. There is no planet B. So we cannot come and be acting as if we are here on our own. We should always remember that there are people back there who are going to give account of our stewardship, and that what has happened so far, we are really, really, really very concerned, and we feel it's very shameful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marian. Uh, some of you may remember that from the very beginning, we have raised our concerns about the language nature positive, and it is not there now. So we are happy about that. But it's still, the language on the nature-based solutions is still included, and here we have some concerns about that language. Again, we have raised our concerns about the corporate capture. Let's listen to Nele Marian about her concerns about whether this has been properly captured or whether we are happy with this language in the final global biodiversity framework. Nele.
Thank you so much, Hemanta. And yes, we have some very serious final concerns. You will all remember that when this whole process started, almost everybody involved was calling for transformative change. And what that really meant when we analyzed it was we needed to change the systems that actually underline the biodiversity loss. What are the global economic and other systems that lead to biodiversity loss? And I think at this final stage of the actually after the adoption of the GBF, we need to ask ourselves the question, was this addressed? And my answer would be no, it was not. We've seen it, as my colleague Marianne said, in agriculture. There is no shift in the agricultural models, and therefore we will not see a shift in the way how agriculture is undermining biodiversity, as was raised by the IPBES 3 years ago. But we are seeing it in all sectors. And very specifically, if you look to target 15, which is about business, then we see what is approved is only that governments should encourage and enable business to do certain things. Now, I'm still waiting for the day when encouraging and enabling business will really make a difference in making sure that they cannot destroy further ecosystems, they cannot keep on polluting, etc. Now, when we go looking at what they actually are encouraged to do, it's reporting. Even reporting on the risks of biodiversity loss to business, on the dependencies. This is not what will lead to real change of the actions of business on the ground that affect biodiversity loss and that effect on indigenous peoples and local communities. Worse, we've seen that the language which was in that target that related to human rights is out. That was there as a very voluntary thing. It's not even there as a voluntary thing. So we're hugely, hugely concerned on this. And as my colleague Hemanta said, yes, this is related to the corporate presence in this process, which we have seen in several different ways, being here as corporations themselves, being here as coalitions of corporations with very green names, coming also as billionaire philanthropic funds, promising huge amounts of money for biodiversity. But of course, these things come with strings attached. Nobody is going to approve a framework that is going against the interests of these businesses when actually they come with big funds. So that's a real question which we have to raise as well. We are seeing that all of this comes linked to a lot of the false solutions, to a lot of the greenwashing measures. Indeed, we are happy that the wording of nature positive is out. We have campaigned for that, and we are very happy that this was not approved. Yet when we look in the details of the framework, you can see that it's still based upon a net approach. It's not there with so many words, but really, it is based upon the idea that overall, we need to make sure that biodiversity gets increased, but a lot of biodiversity can get lost with the promises that more biodiversity gets restored. That's the basic idea the framework is based upon. We also see nature-based solutions several times in the text. This means that actually biodiversity should be capturing carbon offsets to make sure that actually carbon emitters can keep on emitting, while really what we would need is the contrary, that the climate policies and the climate convention make sure that biodiversity doesn't get more lost because of the climate change. So we are seeing a whole lot of corporate pressure, a whole lot of greenwashing, a whole lot of avoiding regulation, and all of that really to make sure that there can be a continued business of usual for those who make the profits. And we are seeing that this is going against a justice perspective and going against lots of the human rights concerns. Even if there's some wins there, we see that human rights environmental defenders are in the text. We have seen the mention of indigenous territories in Target 3. So these are good elements, but these get undermined by the fact that the drivers are really not addressed. So therefore, my take on this framework is that it actually will not be fit for purpose. And I'm very sorry to say so. Thank you.
Thank you, Nelly. Over the centuries, we have seen that how the big transnational corporations have been destroying the biodiversity in the very in most all the countries, especially in the southern countries. At the end, people on the ground are the one own, conserved, protected this biodiversity. And they are the same people who are having trouble with these transnational corporations, or whether when it comes to the animal-human conflict. And without satisfying these people, it is impossible to protect the remaining biodiversity. Have they done enough in these forums? And there are few people, governments come here and spend days and nights discussing about these issues. But unless we bring the justice to the local communities, it is not, you cannot handle this one. And there should be some sort of a mechanism for them to encourage protecting biodiversity. And we see here that subsidiaries reduction, they are going to have something around 500 billion, whereas it is actually several trillions. At the same time, they have some funding mechanisms, but these funding mechanisms are connected to various kind of scientific um, technologies, including digital sequencing, information, etc. So is this going to be really helpful for the local communities and to protect their resources, at the same time stop all these big transnational corporations going and doing mining, destruction, agro-commodity expansion, etc., etc. So I think that's the very basic thing we need to understand. So you have already listened to uh, three speakers from Friends of the Earth International. The floor is yours. You can bring some questions for responses.
Check. Hi, James Deneen from New Science. Hello. You, there it is. You mentioned digital sequence information at the end. Do you think that this agreement to create a new global fund and multilateral mechanism for sharing benefits from digital sequence information could improve on arrangements that exist under the Nagoya Protocol for the communities on the ground that you're talking about, result in real benefits and incentives to biodiversity? Thanks.
Sorry, what we see is that this digital sequencing information is connected with benefit sharing, because digital sequencing information is something in the hands of the scientist at the moment. So there's no local communities don't have any control at the moment. So our concern is, if you want to benefit the local communities in order to protect this biodiversity and the protected areas, there should be somehow the benefits should go to the local communities. Unfortunately, we don't see this is going to really benefit the local community. So that's our big concern. Although that language is there, so it will be, because we don't have the national legislations to support that. And also, we don't think that when the companies or the rich countries come to an agreement with the countries in the south where biodiversity is there, so the local communities are really going to get adequate benefits. So this is one of the area that we need to keep understanding, and we really need to see what this protection. We know that under the red mechanisms, under the climate negotiations, these local communities didn't get much benefits. Actually, it is sometimes the international NGOs, sometimes some of the governments or the regional governments get the benefits, but the local communities didn't receive this kind of benefits. So that's our major concern here. Any more questions, please?
Thank you. I am Wolf Clifton. I'm with an animal welfare NGO called Animal People. Miriam mentioned the language regarding sustainable intensification. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on why that language is potentially dangerous for biodiversity going forward. Thank you.
I would say something that my colleague Nelly would add. I mean, if you look at on the face value, I mean, that is sustainable intensification, you think it's, I mean, a very fanciful word, it's okay. But if you look at the components of what the intensification is all about, it's all about inputs, I mean, the normal way of doing things, the chemical inputs, and which it's alien to the kind of agriculture our farmers, small-scale farmers want. I mean, with agroecology, it's devoid of all these high-yielding chemicals, toxic inputs. It's talking about using the agricultural, the processes from the system. It's what is used to grow these crops in a sustainable, healthy manner, not dosing them with chemicals, not dosing them with all these high pesticides or hazardous chemicals. So with the intensification, they're talking about more of industrial inputs. I mean, even in Nigeria now, even not just in Nigeria, in most African countries, there's a high use of glyphosate. And we know that glyphosate causes, I mean, it's been pronounced, it causes cancer. So with all those things, it comes with all those intensification. People look at that, so a very fanciful word, I mean, the high intensification, but underneath those things, it's like a white sepulcher. It looks good at the surface, but beneath it, there's a lot of bones, and people should be very wary about it. So for us, we are saying agroecology all the way, not co-opted agroecology, not agroecology with all other things, with chemicals. We're talking agroecology in the real sense of the word, in its intent and purpose, intended by our small-scale farmers, which will represent agroecology in harmony with nature, culture. Our culture has a lot to do with agriculture because it's our way of life. Everything in our lives involves food and the agriculture. So don't bring in these externalities that are destroying our land, polluting our environment, and in fact, killing our people. I hope I've been able to answer your question. Nelly, I want to say something.
Yes, I think, in my view, if you look at what sustainable intensification really stands for, it's about the idea that by intensifying certain types of agriculture, you could actually make sure that we as the world's agriculture system, not we as that there would be less land needed. And in order to do that, you really need biotech to get a lot of input in terms of chemicals, etc. And you would do that by producing monoculture production. Monoculture production is very unbiodiversity friendly. There's really zero interaction with surrounding ecosystems, and actually it needs a lot of GMOs, it needs a lot of pesticides, which actually have a very bad impact on the surrounding ecosystems. Now, if it were true that by doing more, by making it a lot more intense, that would reduce the amount of land used, one could still think about it. But actually what we are seeing year after year is, despite the intensification that keeps on happening in agriculture, also these agriculture zones of this type keep on expanding. And if you look at the plans of this kind of agri-industry, they also keep on expanding. So you're having this beautiful wording that actually, for us, it's a kind of a greenwashing thing. It's putting a beautiful wording to an idea, which then actually means that you keep on doing what you do anyway for profits, and you claim that it will be a solution, but that's not really what's there. And this model is really opposite to the model of agroecology, because agroecology has so much agricultural biodiversity in it that even if there is more land with agriculture, this is actually very positive for biodiversity. There are so many insects, birds, etc., who live very well on agricultural lands when they are managed by agroecology. So these are really two very different models, and that is not clear from the text at all, that there needs to be a push for the models which are positive for biodiversity. Thank you.
Thank you, Nelly. Any question? Yes, please. Can you use the mic, please?
I'm interested in your views on the call to have the use of pesticides and highly harmful chemicals. Do you see that as a positive step or one that's going to be impossible to monitor? Do you think that's progress?
Well, I think it will be very difficult to monitor that. I mean, how do you even begin to monitor have? I mean, you could say it's a step, but I don't think it's something, I mean, that could be monitored. I mean, coming from where I come from, how are they even going to do that? For me, it would have been maybe a complete eradication of that in our food because, I mean, the way people do business, I mean, how would you even measure that? How would you say this is reduced? How we go, what are the yardstick? What are the indicators? So I don't really, pesticides are pesticides. I don't think those who produce them would actually reduce them. That's a personal view. So for me, I don't think it's a big win, personally.
Nelly, please.
Yeah, complementing. I think for me, the big concern is if in target 10, you have a vision that will push for sustainable intensification, push for more agro-industry, then you may have a target that talks about reduction of pesticides, but will this really happen? I think that the objective of the target in itself is quite okay, but my worry is, will this really happen? Who is going to make sure that this gets implemented when in another target, we actually have something that pushes for more use of them? So I see the contradictions there.
Thank you. Corporations have not shown any satisfactory results about reducing their profits. I think that's one of the major issues. I think when it comes to sustainable intensification, they will be working on the GMOs, they will be working on the pesticide, fertilizer, and many other inputs to keep their profits as same or high. I think if they hear this document also talking about sustainable consumption, and there's no target about sustainable consumption, and they are only talking about the reducing subsidies. We don't understand how they are going to do the sustainable consumption and reducing the consumption pattern in countries. So I think these are a lot of questions, although these could be beautiful languages are coming into these kind of international frameworks in the multilateral spaces, actual on the ground. So we have to keep monitoring these issues. I think many of these issues like the sustainable intensification, digital sequencing information, and sustainable consumption, and there are many other languages that we need to keep monitoring. I think still the protection is in the hands of the local communities. We have to keep monitoring what is happening on the ground, especially now that they have understood that the indigenous people and the local communities have the rights. There are human rights, they have been agreed. So I think we have to keep monitoring the real implementation on the ground. At the same time, we have to make sure that money is in place for all these biodiversity destruction. So
just to add something before we wrap up, I think it's also a way of continuing business as usual and to avoid regulation. That is why they come up with all these things, so that they want to go off the radar, and so people would think they are doing something. Meanwhile, they are just continuing their toxic business and killing our lands, contaminating our waters, and destroying our environment. Thank you.
And thank you so much for our speakers from Friends of the Earth International, and they are available here. And if you want to talk to them, please come and talk to them. And thank you so much for joining this, our last press conference in this COP15. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well done. That's good. Good moderator.